Katharina Loden, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Great. Glad to be here.
So I have on your bio, you're an investor, entrepreneur, and content creator. Tell me about content creation in the energy and sustainability space. It's a topic very close to my heart, obviously, but I'd love to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah. So I focus on heat pumps. And the reason I focus on heat pumps is that two things. One is people have lots of questions in that. In the US and Canada, Europe was a little bit ahead, especially Germany. And the reason I focus on that is that I just simply love it. I love the transition. I love that now the momentum is picking up to retrofit buildings with heat pumps, and that saves a lot of energy and helps the environment.
So I think the name heat pump can be a little bit confusing to people. So can you tell me, how do heat pumps work? And I think they facilitate maybe heating and cooling, but I'm not sure. I'm even in the sector and I don't know exactly how they work. So I'd love to hear more technically about how they work and what's the benefit to the end users.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. They can do heating and cooling. That's really neat. And then if you do air to water or geothermal heat pumps, so using the air or the ground and then using the heat transfer medium water, you can also do hot water for your building.
Gotcha.
And
What's the benefit over like traditional systems? So I think of here in Florida, we use a lot of air condition, obviously. The AC pretty much has to be used year round. We get a little bit of time when we don't, but man, we use a lot of AC. So in a place like Florida, I just think about, okay, electricity powers the system, the AC system. It turns on, it runs for a while, and then it turns off. How does a heat pump work different or more efficiently?
yeah, it depends on the heat pump system. So let's differentiate between three main systems: the air to air, the air to water, and the geothermal system, right? So air to air is probably what most people are familiar with. It's like the little box that you have in front. If it's not a good unit, then it makes some noise. But essentially, you can heat and cool your home, and that's really great also for both climate change, because as gets warmer, cooling gets more important, and so it's a great investment for people. So the air to air really takes the heat that is outside in the air, and they're really great cold climate heat pumps these days. So people are surprised how much heat you can really get and transfer from the outside when freezing cold outside, right? And then transfers to a refrigerant. And then in the home, you can either do a ducted system. That's great for retrofits because a lot of US buildings have ductworks. Um, or you can do mini splits. That's great for zoning because then each room can be heated or cooled individually. And so you can essentially do the same thing with air to water, but then the transfer medium is water, and water is very efficient as a transfer medium. And then if you use a tank, then the great thing about that is when you combine that with a smart system that takes into account weather changes as well as electricity prices, then you can heat that tank during a time where it's very cheap for you and where you can flatten the curve. There's the duck curve, maybe you know that, and then that's also good for the environment as well. And then the third system, the geothermal, there are two types of, let's call it ground source, because geothermal is typically when you go vertically into the ground, because then you really use that, core energy, earth heat. Whereas if you go like horizontal and run the pipes, just like a meter, 3 feet below the ground, then what happens is you use the energy that the sun creates when it heats the ground. So it's actually a different energy. It's not the core of the earth, it's the sun. But both are thermal systems, horizontal and vertical, are the most efficient. Obviously, also because of the drilling, the most expensive to install. So it takes a little longer to pay it off. But once you paid it off, it's really efficient and neat and cheap to run it.
Very cool. So I understand better what they are now. Now, of course, we get a lot of investors listening to us. So I love to touch on maybe some companies you know of in the sector. that are interesting, that are doing some, let's say, commercial deployments or making a difference in terms of getting these heat pumps out there into the marketplace?
Yeah, it's great. I saw some new ones in Austria and Germany, and they're really efficient. It's they always have a tweak what they focus on. They either do like the AI very well that makes sure it runs at the right time, or they take as much heat out of the air as they can, etc. So they have one tweak that they sell. I invested in Harvest Thermal. I really like this company. It's a great team. They've done really amazing work and are growing, recently raised a round. So, as an investor, you might want to take a look at that. They do an air to water heat pump, and that's really great. It's really in the sweet spot where you have extremely high efficiency, not as high as geothermal ground source heat pumps, but the installation cost is still relatively affordable. So it's kind of that sweet spot where people aren't too afraid of the high upfront cost, but at the same time appreciate not only their savings, the environmental friendliness, but also the coziness, the air quality, and the comfort in the home.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I would imagine deploying these could do a direct to consumer model, but I would imagine like utility partnerships might come in handy when
Yeah.
we deploy these heat pumps. Is that what you're seeing as far as a go-to-market strategy?
Yeah, Harvest Family and a lot of the ones that, focus on flattening the duck curve and focus on, demand source management, they see this advantage for utilities, of course. And if you think about it, I mean, there is a transition happening. More and more utility companies offer a rate-based plans. So that means, or time of use plans, right? And so time of use means that when it's good for the utility and to have offtake and to have higher demand, then the price is lower, right? So they try to manage that demand a little bit through of course, started with the large off-takers like the industrial or commercial, but now it's getting more and more common also for residential customers, right? And so, our utility here, Colorado Springs Utilities, is an example. They recently transitioned, I think, in July, and so on and so forth. Colorado is a huge promoter of that time of use anyway. So the Thermal and other companies would work with those local, ideally investor-owned, usually they're larger, there's a more impactful partnership there with those utilities to really promote those heat pumps because it's really a win, right? For the consumer, for the utility, and for the company. So,
Gotcha. So win-win is always a big one because I know a lot of consumers may be resistant to change, which is very common. So if I have a heat pump installed, maybe I need, correct me if I'm wrong, but I need either a smaller AC unit or I don't need to run it as often or I'm more energy efficient. So hopefully my power bill should go down. But the real question is my heating and cooling work just as well as the old way, or do I have to sacrifice some of the performance?
no, there is no performance sacrifice. People ask a lot about cold climate. I mean, there's no issue, I guess, in Florida about that, right? But when you go to like the northern states or even Canada, people ask me, how what would the air to water, or even air to air work for me here in this climate? And I mean, what I do in my material is really look at the finances, including those really cold winter months and winter days, but also at the practicalities, of course, right? I mean, people might know that once a heat pump reaches a limit, there's usually an emergency backup that works as a resistor, essentially like a toaster, so you never get cold. But of course, that's not as efficient, right? But that should only be the case for 1 or 2 really cold winter days, right? So there's no sacrifice on comfort whatsoever. And with the air to water in the tank, the thermal battery storage, you have that advantage of that the heat pump is like, oh, it's too cold now. I'm gonna wait, right? And I have the um, storage buffer tank. I'm gonna wait now, and then when it gets warm again in during the day, then it'll work. And then usually it's interesting if you look at the COP, it's the coefficient of performance. And stop me if I'm going too long because can get really off track with these topics because I'm so excited about them. But coefficient of performance tells you really efficiency for a specific temperature. And then the cold climate heat pumps go down to really minus up to minus 25 degrees centigrade, right? And so then what happens is they're at 2, so that means 200% efficiency rather than, during the really good days, they can be at 5, so 500% efficiency, right? And then people who come from the fossil fuel world say, like, how can you have, like, I mean, is this literally possible? You can't have above 100% efficiency. But if you think about it, you're not creating heat with one medium to another by burning fuel. But what you're doing is you're taking existing heat and just moving it into the home. That's why you get these high efficiencies.
It makes total sense. And it's one of those ideas. I always say the best ideas are the ones that seem obvious, right?
Yeah.
Like, why haven't we done this before? It makes total sense. So let's talk, I guess, percentages. I know that heating and cooling is typically a very large percentage of the overall power consumption of a typical home. I know it varies from climate to climate, but just a range, what kind of savings are you seeing with these heat pumps? Is it like a 5% savings on the power consumption, or is it like 30 or a 40% type of a savings?
Yeah, it's more like 30 to 40%. So the air to water heat pumps, that's about a 30% savings compared to a gas furnace. And so that for oil furnace, it's even more, right? Because yeah, of course it depends on the oil prices, oil and gas prices, but that's typically the case. And then for geothermal, it's even more, around 40% saving. So it's really a lot. And I think the reason why it hasn't been done all this time is probably, frankly, partially a strong oil and gas lobby, but also I think it's the upfront cost that scare people, right? And so now it's really great that these systems really have come down in price and can cover the lower temperatures as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm an optimist, right? And I'm an optimist based on technology advancements. And it's just happened throughout my lifetime is whenever people get negative on a technology, like when the internet first came out, for example, everyone was negative on streaming video, but they didn't take into account that we would build high speed fiber all over the place and that we would have high speed connections. Everyone was making their assumptions based on the existing dial up technology, right? But of course, we've seen the advancements have been far beyond actually what anyone even predicted. So I think the same is going to be true of energy transition is a lot of the advancements are going in technology are going to make things possible in the not too distant future that would be impossible today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really exciting. And I think it's also, you need to take into account that not every country works the same way. So if you look at Europe, so air to water heat pumps are already the most popular heating and cooling system for new buildings in Germany. And then if you look at Sweden, they've been a little further ahead. I mean, in the different energy spaces, if you whatever you look at, but heat pumps, I think every fifth home in Sweden has a geothermal heat pump, right? I mean, it's cold, and so people get it out of the ground vertically. And for them, it's really worth it, both on the environmental side. They have this mentality of, they want to be, to contribute to a sustainable future, but also economically simply. So,
Sure, it makes a lot of sense. And then I'll throw another one in. I would imagine it probably contributes to resilience because you're getting this heat from the ground. We've seen increasingly in certain parts of the United States, like Texas, we've seen power outages as a result of the grid being unstable or not having sufficient power. So I would imagine sometimes these kind of technologies like heat pumps, like solar, that are taking advantage of a renewable resource is I think it contributes positively to overall resilience.
Absolutely. I think so too. I mean, there's two components. One is the more of a decentralization, right, of the energy management. But the other one is really independence of, fossil fuel prices. And everyone in the US has seen them rise. They just have, to go to the gas station. And so that's really great. Also, really from the financial aspect, also to think about it as from, as an investor, that when people see more and more of an issue, paying their fossil fuel prices, they'll start with the obvious car, but then they'll go like, my energy bill is really rising. And it's not only the absolute increase, it's also the volatility, right? And so that would be much more smooth with heat pumps.
Absolutely. You hit on a key theme, which I think is distributed generation or decentralization.
Yep.
And we have a big liberty focus here in the United States
Yep.
around us being, let's say, sovereign as individuals. And I think when you have the ability to produce your own power and you're using decentralized methodologies, that certainly is a contributor to freedom, not a detractor of freedom. For example, you're not going to drill for your own oil. It's just impossible. It's a large centralized type of a system. But with many of these new technologies, you're putting more power, I think, in the hands of consumers, which ultimately should be a contributor to freedom. So I'll say we got to find the middle ground here to get everybody on the same page.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head. And, I think a lot of these newer startups, new companies have been promoting and selling that as well. This thought of people in power, democratization of the energy sector, freedom for the consumer. Absolutely.
Very good. Well, so are there any other companies that you'd like to mention? We're getting close to time here, but a lot of our investors tune in and want to know about interesting startups that are out there. Could be in heat pumps or could be in other areas of energy transition.
Yeah, great question. My own portfolio companies come to mind,
Go
but
ahead. You could be self-serving. That's fine. We give the disclaimer that Katharina is an investor here. So
right. Yeah. So in the green hydrogen space, so I invested in Advanced Ionics. They have a new green hydrogen technology. They're growing. They're recently raised around. So that's really great. Just to mention Harvest Thermal again, really great example. To have lots of collaborations, with Block Power and other companies in that sector. And then I've also invested in Impact Hero, Grow My Tree. So that's one. It's not too much, home or energy or that related, but it's also sort of in the decarbonization sector. And then since, my PhD was in metallurgy and materials engineering, I always follow the steel sector very closely as well. And there are two companies that come to mind. That is H2 Green Steel out in Europe, but also Electra here in Boulder because I'm based in Colorado. So
very cool. So another question I have to ask you as an investor, are there certain themes that you look for? So many people worry about the energy sector investing because we hear, oh, it's heavy. It's not lightweight. It's not asset light. It's can be asset heavy. And many investors got used to the tech days of software and small investments and massive returns. So how do you get comfortable with investments in the energy sector?
I think it's mostly long-term thinking that applies, and then just the part of, I mean, with advanced sonics was an easy one because the green hydrogen sector is just so massively, growing, and they're just desperate for good talent in that space. It's less of a money, it's more of a talent search there. But yeah, I think those are the big ones, really thinking more long term. I mean, it's all always like, what's your goal and what's the goal of your GPs as a VC, right? Of your LPs, sorry, as if you're the GP, right? So you're managing other people's money. So then what are their expectations to the returns, right? And then But my general tendency is like I also see now that people are backing out because there's sort of a market drought, but I'm actually the opposite. I think anti-cyclical. So I'm like, this is the best time because you get the best deals at the best price. So,
We are
um,
aligned on that one. I made a number of personal investments this year, whereas I hadn't in the past, but you're seeing these valuations so nicely discounted that I just feel like it's a great time. And you're right, a lot of the bigger venture capital funds are pulling back, which makes really great deals available on the market. Really, one of the best years for good valuations, good deals has been this year from my experience.
yeah. Oh, great. Yeah. Totally aligned. So those are the two main ones speaking financially. And then, of course, you have um, an X goal in mind, but it's also at that moment really to look at the team. And it's really very exciting to help fund a team that drives positive change. And so I think that it's coupled for me. And so in that way, you could say I'm partially an emotional investor, but not in a sense that it doesn't make financial sense. Because if you look at decarbonization, like most of the solutions, especially in the heavy industry sectors, they're gonna be the ones that last. They're gonna be the ones that make the deep technology change and the ones that we really need also as as human beings.
No, I absolutely agree. And I think that long term focus theme that you hit on is so true. And Bill Gates, of course, focused in on that himself when he first got into the market, was just saying, listen, we're deploying physical technologies to solve physical problems. It takes longer. It's not as fast as software. It takes longer to alpha test, longer to beta test, longer to do everything. But if you're in it for the long run, you can do very well, I think, in this segment.
Absolutely.
Katarina, this has been great. Can you tell the audience how they can get in touch with you? I'm excited to hear that you're going back into content creation. So plug your channels.
Yeah, reach out at katarina.loden@gmail.com. I've got a YouTube channel. It's called Katas E Point with a TH. And then what else? Yeah, probably link in the description below as well.
Very good. Yeah, we'll put a link. And I know that you had a LinkedIn or excuse me, a YouTube channel previously. So you're not starting from zero, which
Yeah,
is a good thing. It's never easy to start from zero.
check it out. It's a mix of energy, technology, and the focus on heat pumps. That'll be the focus in the future as well. So Katas E Point.
Very good. Katarina Loden, it's been great having you on Energy Superheroes. Thanks for being here.
Peter, thank you so much for having me. It was a blast.